So I'm just going to share what Hinduism has meant to me, and hopefully you'll connect something. Some of this will somehow maybe connect with you on your journey. Mentally, so the intellectual part of Hinduism, I probably read more Hinduism than I've read any other teaching. Christianity, as Cher was saying, it's sort of threaded throughout of most New Thought. New Thought started, the writings were in the 1800s and early 1900s when Christianity pervaded the American culture. So you see it intertwined in a lot of the New Thought books and teaching. There was just sort of an assumption that Jesus Christ was the teacher. Although many of these people studied Buddhism and Hinduism and all these other world religions, Christianity still was the base. So I've read Christianity sort of through New Thought, but I was not a big Bible reader. I never particularly cared for it. I'll get to that in a minute. So, but I have read I've read 3 interpretations of the Gita. One of them was over 1,000 pages. I've read Sri Aurobindo over 1,000 pages. I've read Sri Aurobindo's interpretation of the Upanishads. So I've read a lot of Hinduism directly from the scriptures themselves and what the interpretations are. So it really is something that has intellectually impacted me. And that's important as we look at our journeys. A lot of times I think the intellect is what we cut off first, because we don't think sometimes it's as spiritual, it's too heady. I hear that all the time, well, that's too heady. But what we have to realize is how we think about things, how we see things, is how we interpret what's happening around us. So if you have an experience of God, if you have this divine transcendent experience, what they notice is that the way we will interpret that experience is what we tell ourselves. So if I'm Christian and I have a divine experience, I'm going to interpret it through a Christian theology. If I have a Hindu or Buddhist or whatever my theology is, and I have a mystical experience, and it'll be sort of also my personal stage of development, that's a whole nother talk, I will interpret it through my own human stage of development, what I see. So what we are telling ourselves about what this presence is actually very important. The wider our perspective is, the vaster our intellectual understanding is, then the more clear we can have an experience, because we don't have all these walls in our minds, in our thoughts of what it can and cannot be. We're open to everything. And that just, since the infinite is infinite, it doesn't have walls. So we want to have as little walls as possible. So one thing you might find, at least I have found, as I read about these different religions and allow, especially Hinduism, because it is so vast, there is so much to it. It just goes on and on. It's so specific and detailed. I've read so much about it, and I probably remember only a quarter of everything I've read, because there's just so much. But what it does is it's constantly pushing me beyond my borders of what I know and understand, so I can see more widely. Emotionally, it's had an impact on me. So, as I've shared with many of you before, some of you are newer, when I was young, I had a direct experience with Jesus the Christ, this Christ love. And from that experience, which was extraordinary, I was in love with Jesus. There was just this personal, Jesus said, worship me in spirit. And that's exactly what my relationship was this deep, loving relationship. The reason why I didn't like the Bible as a kid, because I was looking more for that experience, that divine, transcendent experience. And then I would go to churches and they would do a Bible study, and I'd hear the Jesus in the Bible about you have to do this and you can't do that, or Satan's going to get you. And I'm like, wait a minute, this had nothing to do with this experience that I had, which was so much more loving. So, you couldn't even humanly explain it, and that Jesus in the Gospels seems so small compared to Jesus in spirit, so I wasn't drawn to it. I've actually understand it more now as an adult, but we'll get that later when we go to Christianity. But it didn't connect with my heart at all, but the spirit of Jesus definitely did. So then, again, some of you already know this, my calling towards ministry came from, so I'd already read this chapter on Hinduism, I understood about Hinduism, but I also grew up in a family that watched the news. I would hear about these Hindu gurus, Osho's name, I can't remember what his name was before he was Osho. I don't remember. What was it? I can't remember his name. He did, and he had all these Rolls Royces and all this drama came around, which is why he changed his name. And And you hear about different other gurus. This was in the 70s who were coming over and doing some questionable activities. So in my mind, even though I was interested in Hinduism, I was still separate from it. I didn't trust it, the teachers themselves, because of what I had heard. So when I was introduced to Yogananda in this vision dream, it was the Christ presence said, you can trust him. So in essence, I was being introduced to Yogananda, and behind Yogananda was Shunryu Suzuki, who was a Buddhist. And Yogananda in this vision dream told me to be a minister. That led me to, of course, all right, who is Yogananda? And let me learn more about him. I read Autobiography of a Yogi. Now, like I said, this is the emotional part. You can have all the intellectual understanding you want, or I shouldn't speak to you. I had all my own intellectual understanding, but I love Jesus. And here was Yogananda saying all these Hindu gurus could do the same things Jesus could do and had this incredible state of enlightenment. And I felt like, no, my guy's better. And I went through that. Like, I'm a monogamous lover of God through Jesus, and I didn't know how to. And then I went to Self-Realization Fellowship when I moved to LA, and I'm doing all their lessons and going, but I felt this conflict in my heart. It was not an intellectual conflict, it was in my heart, that I was betraying this presence that I loved with all my heart and all my soul and all my body. How could I also love Yogananda? So I had to work that through, that was a very human thing that I was dealing with, which is our separation with our borders. My love could only go so far, my devotion could only go so far, it could only include so much. And so it really worked me emotionally till finally I just let go and allowed and recognized that Jesus was Yogananda and Yogananda was Jesus, because these human identities, all these separations don't actually, the Christ is Yogananda, the Christ is Jesus, the Christ is Shunryu Suzuki, the Christ is all of us. You know, namaste is I see the divine in you and you see the divine in me. And when I really got what that meant, that they were brothers, there was no competition, that all these were human ideas I had in my head, walls dissolved in my heart. So it had an emotionally expansive impact on me, as well as intellectual expanse. Spiritually, this has actually been the most fun for me to reflect on this past week, because Hinduism has had a far bigger impact on my spiritual journey than I ever recognized. I mean, I knew it did, but I didn't, until I thought about it in this context, I didn't realize how much it did, because the primary difference between Hinduism and Buddhism, the Eastern traditions and Western traditions, is this idea of the spiritual teacher. And since I had the call to be a minister and was from Yogananda and Shunryu Suzuki, I couldn't help but notice the differences. In Eastern teachings, the purpose of the guru, and in Buddhism, the Zen master, is to bring someone to enlightenment. Enlightenment is that state of waking up beyond your human identity and knowing, not just intellectually or emotionally, but that you are a spiritual being, that I know that I am that I am. And that's a reality, that you don't have just a peak experience. I know many people have had mystical experiences, peak experiences, but this becomes a sustained way of being. It's direct contact, but it's sustained direct contact. It's a state of becoming. And that really is the focus of the teachers on the Eastern tradition. In the Western tradition, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the focus is to be, in Christianity, we're called minister. We're to minister to people. We're not meant to be the enlightened ones. We're here just to minister, to care for our fellow brothers and sisters. So much of Western teaching is about creating service, about giving out, to make the world a better place. If you read the chapter on Hinduism in Houston Smith, he was saying that that's not a huge focus in Hinduism, because they don't actually believe that this planet Earth is meant to become heaven on earth, that the whole journey, they call it a middle world, and we're here to learn lessons. All these lessons we're here to learn, but the planet itself isn't here to become heaven on earth, so that's not a drive. And that's one thing I started to notice. They don't have this drive to make the world a better place necessarily, maybe in happenstance. Maybe as a way to wake up in God, you give service, but it's not necessarily the main motivating drive that you get on the Western teaching. Also, within Christianity, specifically in Christianity, according to Hinduism, Jesus would be the guru. There's one guru. in Hinduism, there are many gurus. We've talked about that before. Many people who are enlightened. And you study with an enlightened teacher who will help you become enlightened. So the entire perspective was different. So as I was going through, first I was in practitioner training. And in practitioner training, we look at all the different sides of ourselves, relationships, how you feel about money, how you feel about your health, how you feel about sex, how you feel about death. I mean, basically everything that we say is human, and we would work on these different areas of our life, and we had to do affirmative prayers on these sections. And I kept doing my affirmative prayers on I want to be God-realized. And they said, no, you're supposed to be focusing on those areas. I'm like, I don't want those areas. I want to be God-realized. And they didn't want me to pray about being God-realized. I'm like, well, why do I want to be those other things? I want to be God-realized. And I think we're changing as an organization, but even New Thought's whole focus was, who are we becoming in this earth? It's very focused on descension, on bringing spirit into the earth, into creating heaven on earth, which is good, but that I recognize now how much, by this time, Eastern tradition had taken over my mind and saying, I'm more interested in the ascension, on enlightenment, on waking up. And then I got into ministerial school, and they just gotten $1 million donation. This is United Church, and so they created this very rigorous academic ministerial school, and it was a great program, by the way. They had professors specialize in their fields from universities all over the country. We did distance learning, so I had some of the greatest professors in the different world's religions, science and spirituality, just really great program. But I was upset because, again, I thought, well, if I want a really good academic program, I'd go to Harvard Divinity School or something. But I want to wake up. I want to be a mystic. Why aren't we training our ministers to do that? And the Holmes Institute board pulled me aside and told me to be quiet. So I behaved the rest of my ministerial training. But it's not, I think the marriage is happening more and more, but I recognize more and more why I had this struggle, because there was this desire in me, what does it mean for me to be a minister? Am I here to help people become enlightened? Am I here to be of service? The pastoral part being one. Am I here to help people get better relationships, help people have better financial lives, have better health? So it's been a journey for my own self. And my connection with the Eastern teachings has made that a vigorous question in my own internal journey of who am I, what am I here to serve, what am I doing, basically. Great confidence in myself. I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay. So where am I now? This has been the most fun question. And I often ask people in classes, we begin our foundations class every week with have you had any insights, revelations, and ahas? And this is what I mean, because I've had a revelation, insight, and aha, even since we've done this Hinduism. So I have 2 points. The first one, so I mentioned earlier in one of my previous talks, the very first time I read this section on Hinduism, we were talking about the 4 paths of God, and one of the paths is path of knowledge. And I've always heard it as knowledge and thinking, but Houston Smith used the word reflection. And as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh, not only do I do that, I couldn't not do it if I tried. Like it was who I am. And you can't, and this is one of the things, as you're looking at your path, the path is not something you choose. That's the biggest misconception. It's who you already are. So what you're doing about your path is you're recognizing already who you are. You're not adding something. You're not doing something new. You're just trying to understand, who am I already? That's my path. So I had that realization, oh my gosh, I've been this my whole life. I could not be if I tried. And in that realization that who I am and my path are one and the same thing, there's this, the whole mystical, everything's light, the walls dissolve. And then later on, this truth was up there and light was raining down on me of like, this is just, it was like really this very long experience really anchoring me in this is your path. But there was an aspect of it that I never particularly cared for because I didn't understand it. And that when the walls dissolved, I was living in Brentwood in the LA area, upper middle class, very nice neighborhood. But there was this homeless guy. And so when the walls dissolved, the person that I become one with is this homeless guy. And he's full of light, and we're one. And that's always bothered me. I'm like, well, of all the people I could have become one with, why'd you pick a homeless guy? And we know there's no accident. So over the years, I've always tried to figure out what that meant to me, why when I find out who I am and what my path is, that made me homeless. I wasn't very fond of that idea because I really don't want to be homeless. So then this past, as we've been revisiting this chapter on Hinduism, I had my revelation. Oh, yes, I think those choirs are just there for the moment. Oh. In the section of the stages of life, there's the student, the householder, the retired person, and the sannyasin. The sannyasin is the person who has decided to say, I'm done with life, I'm done with this world, I reject it, not reject it. I'm complete with it, and I just give up everything. I'm now completely outside of the system and give my whole life to God. They call it the homeless mendicant. That's the spiritual person who walks around with the begging bowl. That's the visual. But it's not the same as a homeless person who's doing it because they're not awake. These are the people who are awake. They're holy people in India, the sannyasin. And Jesus said, when you follow me, if you want to be a disciple, you have to let everything go. So I was reflecting on that, and I recognized, oh my gosh, that's why it showed up right at that time where I was being shown what my path is. I'm just showing you what a revelation, when I ask for revelations, insights, and ahas, this is what I'm talking about. When I had that realization that my path and who I am is one and the same thing, that eventually it's going to lead me, being a reflective being, this particular path will lead me to that state of sannyasin. What that means for me, and it's very about being a minister here and now, one of the struggles that I've had is where do I belong spiritually, religiously? I don't really identify myself personally as a science and mind minister. I love the principles, but I don't feel of myself as a follower of Ernest Holmes. But then I don't feel like I'm a Christian. I'm like, well, am I Hindu? Am I Buddhist? Where do I belong? I want to say, okay, have this call to be a minister. Of what am I to be a minister? Where's my home? And I think in my head, I've always felt eventually I'm going to find it. I'm going to find that place where I belong. And it just had that realization as I'm reading this section of the Sannyasin, I don't have a home. The path of reflection has taken me to the place where the more I contemplate what truth is, I cannot hold myself in any one place of truth. No one place says, this is my home, because it's all places. That the path of the reflective has gotten me to that place of homelessness, but in a spiritual way, not as a rejected way. You know, it's a raising up. That was a huge revelation. So I can stop looking for my home on this earth. Where's my organization? Where's my people? Everyone's my people. What are your insights and revelations on Haas? The thing I want to end with, the Lighthouse. The reason why I focus on the Lighthouse more than Centers for Spiritual Living. First of all, let me just say I really love the principles that Ernest Holmes teaches because they are universal. I think this symbol is one of the greatest symbols ever. I can use it for any world's religion. I can use it for any philosophy. I'm not going to go into what that, come to take class if you want to know what that symbol is. But it's a really powerful symbol, and it's so simple. I love affirmative prayer treatment. These are, to me, the two greatest gifts are these universal principles that Ernest Holmes teaches in affirmative prayer. But I've said this before, but it's been a long time, so I said it. So for those of you who don't know, I am not an ordained minister of Centers for Spiritual Living. I am a licensed minister. The ordination is, so you're licensed consistently through home office. Ordained means you're a minister for life with Centers for Spiritual Living. I chose and have continued to choose not to take that final step because it felt, now I understand better why, but it felt out of integrity, because to me it was a commitment to saying I am a minister for Ernest Holmes' organization, and I couldn't do that. I love it, but he's not my guy. If I have any guy, it's Jesus, but I have multiple guys. I'm homeless. I don't have a guy. I mean, I do. Jesus is my guy, but I couldn't, it just felt out of alignment with who I am. But but the reason why I love the organization is because it teaches these principles and then allows all of us to be free to find our own paths, which is really important to me. So one of the reasons why I stress the Lighthouse before Centers for Spiritual Living is because for me what the Lighthouse represents, Yogananda talks about the shift we have in the state of consciousness metaphorically through boats. And that boats cross, the water is the state of consciousness, and the boat is the vehicle that we travel on to have these shifts in consciousness around our states of consciousness. That's his metaphor. So for me, all those different boats are the different religions, all the different paths. A lighthouse is there to serve all of them. It doesn't just serve one boat. All boats, all religions. If you're agnostic and atheist, it doesn't care. It's here to serve everyone. It's here to serve every race, culture, creed, sexual orientation. It does not matter. The Lighthouse serves all. And so for me, that's the anchor of, as I've been looking for what is my anchor as a minister, as a spiritual guide, it's the Lighthouse. And that we are each these lighthouses that serve all people, and we don't have certain boats that we serve or certain boats that we identify. We shine the light on everybody. And and Hinduism has been my wonderful, expansive gift in teaching and leading me in that direction.